I'm going to begin, guys, by asking a very generic question. What initially attracted you to getting involved in 1%?
For me, it had a lot to do with Katrina. First of all, the character. It's really difficult to get strong female roles in films. A lot of the time, it seems to be a bit of a challenge, and she has a dynamic that I was interested in exploring. And also, I was one of the last people to become involved, and I was told a lot of really good things about the team, and that I'd be able to learn a lot from everyone, which I did. So that had a lot to do with it too.
Which all ended up being lies.
Yeah, I learnt nothing.
I knew Maddie beforehand, and we knew that the script was sort of about, and so went through the audition circuit and we got on pretty early. But I think for me, it was the fact that in this world that you expect to be sort of all bravado and men and boys and guns and all this, that there was something simmering underneath, and you could tell that when reading the screenplay that Matt had written. Whether it be the strength of the women, or whether it be the complexity that Nuck sort of has, you know, I don't think it's ever, we never talk about it specifically, but there's all these sort of ambiguous themes that are sort of underlying the story, and that really appealed to me.
Because, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the character of Katrina is a great role, and there's almost shades of Lady Macbeth to her. I mean, was that a conscious kind of influence looking into that particular character, or do you think she's so kind of ingrained in kind of literature and kind of just, I don't know, culture that it's sort of natural as she would be?
To me, Katrina always had a mystery to her. There was always something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and that sort of, I think, served itself to the way that I played it. There was always something ambiguous about her, the Lady Macbeth thing that you're referencing. There's a quote from Lady Macbeth, and I think it's "Look like the flower, but be the serpent underneath it," and that I just had that image in my mind for the duration of the shooting. So, yeah, I honed in on that. Glad you picked up on it.
Yeah, because I mean, they're incredibly flawed characters, but they are the best, I'm assuming, the best characters to play. And they've got so many demons they're battling inside. It's so kind of internalised as well. It must give you so much as actors to work with when you get roles like this in a film. Yeah,
and I think particularly in this film, there's so many agendas that are sort of coming up against each other. That everyone had their opportunity to sort of invest in their own character and create what these stories were, and the way that we rehearsed too. Steve set up an environment where we could all collaborate with each other. We had the writer on set, so you know it was a really condensed sort of period, and it was very close. So yeah, I mean it's wonderful to work on projects like that, but I think mainly because of the way that we worked, you know.
Do you think that in order to, because as I mentioned, they are flawed. I mean, they have got some kind of...
Oh, they're flawed.
I mean, they're ambitious and they're loyal. I mean, there are sort of positive traits. But do you think that in order to embody a character, you need to like them? Is that kind of...
I think that you have to... I don't think that you have to like them. I think that you have to think that you're doing the right thing.
You have to be their biggest fan.
Yeah.
Their biggest supporter. In a weird way. You can't, I remember someone telling me that you can't play, you know, it's really hard to play something really dark. You know, and if you don't believe it, no one else will. So you sort of have to justify in a weird way the motivations of your character, even if that is something that you, as the person, don't agree with.
I'm talking of sort of dark characters. I mean, Matt's performance is exceptional in this movie. I mean, it's hard to imagine him switching off when
he switches off.
When he would shout,
he's so far from dark. He's a giant teddy bear, really, you know.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, because I just got this impression that he just sort of just maintained that kind of presence on set. But I'm assuming, was there quite a jovial sort of atmosphere despite the kind of themes of the movie?
I don't think jovial is the right word. We were all we took it very seriously, and I mean, obviously, but we bonded in a way, we moved together as a unit similar to how we did in the film, and I think that there was a little bit of bleeding in and out of characters on set. We had to, with these, you know, smaller budget films too, you have time constraints, so to get to places you have to be there for a little bit longer, you have to spend time getting to those places. So we all kind of we supported each other's moods and where we had to be. But when we weren't doing that, yeah, we had a great time.
And obviously the script is so well informed, but did you sort of seek to do any research into this kind of underground kind of culture, this sort of criminal underbelly? Yeah. And if so, is that quite a difficult thing to do? Because I'm assuming they deliberately stay out in the sort of shadows. Yeah.
We had a lot of people put up their hand, and because we were dealing with the subject matter, come and assist us because they wanted it to be done properly. You know, I think they've seen enough of this either glorified or completely over the top. And so that was a really interesting part of the process, finding out about the hierarchy of how these worked and how these clubs really worked for many of them as a sense of family or a sense of belonging. And that's sort of all it is to them, you know what I mean? It may be in a lower socioeconomic area, but that's what it is. It's a place to belong, I think, for most of them.
And what's the collaborative process like with Stephen? Is he one of the director that gives you a lot of freedom? Is he quite hands-on? What's he like to work with?
It's very free.
Yeah, I would say free, more so.
We had a week rehearsal.
Yeah, we did a little bit of rehearsal. I think too, because we have such strong relationships, and it's very relationship. The film's all about the bonds that all the characters have with each other. So it was up to us to do that work because Steve can't be there for all that, and we didn't have the time. So we had to do a lot of work so that then we could be free with Steve.
And you meet the characters in the film at the very end point in their relationship, actually when it all goes to shit. So we had to sort of fill in how they got to there beforehand in parts of the film that you don't see. Why we care for these people should be because of their relationship with each other or their affection for each other.
I mean, there does seem to be, it almost feels like a sort of movement at the moment in Australian cinema of quite gritty, sort of naturalistic films.
I think that's always...
Because you've got the kind of Snowtown and obviously Animal Kingdom, which are the kind of big mainstream ones, and then I think there was Son of a Gun as well, which came out. Does it feel like this is, from Australian actors yourselves, I mean, or is this something that you feel you've been creative for a long time?
I think, for a start, they're like three vitally different films, but I think there is a similar aesthetic because in all of them we have no time, and they're all done on the smell of an oily rag. Essentially, like we don't have the $20 million budget. So I think what you see is it done at speed, and it's DOPs with it slung over their shoulder, and you shoot a whole scene out in sort of an hour, 2 hours. And I think Australians particularly are really good at that because they've sort of been forced to be. And I think there's a certain quality to that style of filmmaking. I'm not as far as a movement goes. I'm not really sure.
I think it's Australia has like that earthy rawness to it as well. There is something about Australia that has that grit to it in the dark corners of it's like it's a true representation of a part of Australia that you don't see so much, I guess. I don't know.
We don't shy away from the rawness of it, do we? No. It's interesting.
Yeah, because do you think it's quite a hard balance to get right as Australian actors, where there's obviously a sense of loyalty to your home nation? You want to make good films that really kind of boost in the Australian film industry, but at the same time, there must always be that kind of lure of Hollywood, where these big roles in the kind of more sort of blockbustery type movies. I mean, how do you kind of balance that in terms of picking projects? You try to consciously always look for good Australian projects.
Just put Spielberg on hold so you can, because it's important to do the things that are gritty in Australia. I don't know for you. I can't speak for you, but not real. It's always project based. It's always what the character and what the script entails. Whether it's a challenge, whether it stretches your range. I think.
I think that there isn't enough content. There's not enough films made in Australia to limit yourself to Australian films. I don't see the harm in stretching yourself and expanding overseas. And the brilliant thing about that is that when you are successful overseas, you bring more value to the films in Australia, and people in Australia need to start watching their own films because it doesn't happen enough. And hopefully if we take, so many Aussies have done so well overseas now, and a lot of them have kind of stayed away from coming back home, but I hope that I always want to come back home and do films because I love it, and I think it's good to support your hometown,
To influence the culture there, yeah. I mean, Blanchett's been doing that for years. There's a lot of people that sort of work over here and do the incredible films, and choose to live somewhere else. And I think that's more in line with the way you'd like to do it. But the reality is, this industry often decides for you.
Yeah, you take what you can as well.
Because I guess obviously actors of your generation, when you were growing up, there were obviously you had huge Australian stars in Hollywood, like Russell Crowe, and then there's also Nicole Kidman. Obviously, I was just wondering about that kind of. Does it almost feel like a natural progression as an actor that is where you would eventually
because
end
you're
up
Australian?
In some way? Well, no, because you're Australian. I guess it's probably the same for British actors as well in some ways.
End up where?
In Hollywood, does it always feel like that's like kind of like the end game in some way when you're sort of starting off in this industry?
So, when you're starting off, and I think it's different for everyone. I've got friends who love working in theatre and have their whole life, and that's satisfying enough for them. I think it sort of depends on what your goals are. I sort of see Hollywood as separate to doing, incredible independent films from wherever they may be. You have to be. Ryan Gosling did Lars and the Real Girl after he was Ryan Gosling. You know what I mean? And I think there's. You can attach yourself because of it. You have to aspire to work with great directors, great writers, great material, as opposed to work in Hollywood. And I think, that can come anywhere.
Abbey, because some of the films we've seen, are quite sort of surreal. They're very kind of real stylistic films. Obviously, you've got Mad Max and Neon Demon and Dark Tower. And was it quite nice reverting back to a more real world in some ways?
Yeah, I was aching for it. The year that we shot 1%, I had just come off the back of a couple of studio films, and I was not feeling satisfied, and I really needed to work in the craft of acting with other. I needed something like this. It came at a perfect time for me. So, yeah, I do crave doing this type of work.
But do you think you saw owe so much to kind of Mad Max? I mean, what an introduction to kind of the world of cinema to get involved in a project like that. I mean, it's pretty much considered to be one of the best films of the kind of last decade.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? I mean, yeah, I feel very lucky. It changed my life.
And Ryan, as well, I was wondering, because you've got the Mary Madeline film coming to your...
Do I?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how about playing...
I don't have the film, but I'm a part of the film.
Yeah,
I see.
Because obviously, when you play Joseph, I mean, how do you, when it comes to playing a...
You know all these things.
I know. IMDb's a really, really good place.
I'm not going to get in trouble.
When you play a character that everyone has their own idea of like that, I mean, how do you go about stamping your own kind of sensibilities onto a role like that and sort of recreating it in some ways? Because I mean, he's maybe famous is the wrong word, but it's someone that everyone knows.
As in who's playing the characters, it becomes familiar to. Oh, you mean back there? Oh, well, look, that was very particularly Garth's process. I mean, and it wasn't about. It was very opposite to playing someone that someone knows. In fact, I think that's very much what the film will be working to avoid, especially from Mary Magdalene's point of view. I don't know yet, of course. But Garth sets up an environment. We went there, we didn't rehearse lines once, we didn't read through the script once, we didn't chat through character. We'd sit down and have a family meal out of traditional foods and then paint each other and explain what they meant and go through like 2 weeks of like exercises like that. And by the time we shot, we never would have run the scene once, and Garth set up this trust. So I think he was very much about humanising these characters as opposed, and I mean, Joaquin Phoenix, he had to play Jesus, you know what I mean? Can you imagine like getting cast as Jesus, the pressure that's involved with that? And what I found really remarkable about the way he worked was that he wasn't trying to play Jesus. He was just a man, a man who was trying to heal, trying to help people, in a very human sort of way.
Because it must be quite hard, I guess, to find the human within a character that feels like they're part of this.
How do you play Jesus? Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the quintessential everyone knows, But I think with each role you approach it differently, depending on the material and depending on how much rehearsal time you have, and depending on and what sort of things you want to do for the character.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, guys.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching HeyUGuys.
Hey, you guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey,